Hello, Workforce Board members and partners. I'm Eleni Papadakis, Executive Director of the Workforce Board. This pre-meeting video ties to the economic cycle planning item on your board agenda for January 30th. I'm not actually going to talk to you about economic cycle planning, a little bit about what you're going to hear, but I'm instead going to talk a bit about the work that the board and the system undertook together during the Great Recession, which will tie to your discussion of economic cycle planning on the 30th. This item came on the agenda because Employment Security Department has been doing their own organizational economic cycle planning, and in hearing what they're doing, I thought it would be very useful for the board to learn from them as you folks are moving into the planning process. I think there's a lot of what they're learning, how they're looking at data, that would be really helpful. In addition to data, they're also looking into the experiences of both customers and the staff, and making tweaks and technical changes to current processes. They're also developing a set of guidance tools so that at any time when a major shift happens, employment security will have a resource to turn to. The board will use that presentation, that set of presentations, to start thinking about how the system might become more nimble and responsive to economic shifts. Here are just some questions to consider as you're listening and engage in the discussion. Number one is, should economic cycle planning become a system priority, and then what does that mean? If it is, you are starting the process for TAP planning for the 2020 submission of TAP. You have 4 strategic priorities now. Would you like this to be a 5th strategic priority, or perhaps a separate initiative of the board? At this point, it is the discretion of each partner agency to undergo this kind of planning effort on their own. You might want to think about, if agencies are doing this, should there be a communication vehicle for the board to discuss with them. So the board's and the system's efforts during the Great Recession. It was an interesting time. The board had just completed the state strategic plan in 2008, and its top priorities were helping low-income workers achieve higher earning potential, and also working with older disconnected youth to get them on a good economic trajectory. Neither of those priorities seemed to have the same weight that they did when we developed the plan. And so the board chose to suspend its strategic priorities from the plan, and instead to focus the system on addressing the reemployment needs of dislocated workers. They, after some meetings, decided they really need to go into the field and the field across the state and try to understand the lived experiences of our constituencies during the recession, and so pooled resources across the system to implement 4 facilitated regional forums with a great turnout, cross-sector turnout. I think the WDCs especially did a great job of getting people to the table, but then so did all of our partners. There was a team that worked with our facilitator, Lindsay Woolsey, that pulled together the information that we heard from the forum, synthesized it, pulled out themes, and then we held a statewide conference where we reported back out to people what we thought we heard, both the problems and some of the potential solutions. We had also, during that time, put surveys out to the business community, economic development, and others. So came to that statewide conference with a lot of input, and then used the conference to help narrow down the focus of what would become the board's initiative. And the board's initiative was called Retooling Washington's Workforce. we drilled in on a lot of the data to try to find out what made this recession so different. We did know that construction and manufacturing were the first hit for the industry sectors, and they were absolutely hit the hardest. But as time went on, virtually every industry sector in Washington was hit pretty darn hard. But that early start with construction and manufacturing caused a very distinct difference in who we saw in the dislocated worker pools from prior recessions. These were mostly men. And older men. Usually in an economic downturn, the first waves of folks are younger because it's that last hired, first fired scenario. But in this case, we were seeing older men, highly skilled, working at the top of their field, earning at levels much higher than state averages. Most of these folks had never experienced any significant period of unemployment before. When we started looking at the data, a large majority of folks on the rolls had been unemployed at least 6 months. We saw people being really dejected, somewhat resentful as they came into the system, and many of them just didn't know how to work with the system and didn't want to. But pervasive feelings of depression, helplessness, and hopelessness. A lot of dislocated workers just stopped coming into our system for services. One other thing, we did find that so many of these older workers had very limited experience with technology or computers of any kind, and we knew that was going to be a barrier as we tried to transition them back into the workplace. So I found these slides about the initiative, Retooling Washington's Workforce from 2009, and thought rather than trying to recreate it or remember the story, I would just use these and take you through them. So I'm going to try not to get too far into the weeds about the initiative, but I thought there were some interesting points that would resonate with folks. So these were the key takeaways from the forums, and this was largely from our employer participants. It was really interesting to learn about what they were experiencing during the recession and how they were reeling, and the marketplace that they operate in was reeling, and they were not looking for new hires, many of them, because they hadn't figured out how they were restructuring themselves and how they were going to use their existing workforce, but they were asking for help in upskilling their workers or retraining their workers as they decide on their restructuring. We also learned that employers were very wary of hiring from the dislocated worker pool. They talked about damaged goods and risky hires, and wondered if they were the deadwood of the companies that laid them off. And that was one we knew we had to drill in on because the perception seemed very pervasive among the employer community. Many employers talked about their dissatisfaction with recent referrals from our system. Folks didn't have the right skill sets. We did get a sense that their skill needs had changed, and maybe that information didn't get transferred. But they also talked about the poor fit of some of the folks that were referred. Also, that last bullet, employers were asking for a single point of contact. Please don't all come knocking on our doors. Could you have one or two people that represent the system? So you can see the goal of the initiative, no real surprise, was to help unemployed people get to work and to have more employers find the skills they need to compete. There was a real commitment to achieving results quickly and making impact quickly. And for this particular presentation, we had said to begin within 6 months. Actually, there were signs of impact in the first month, which was really impressive. And that was with no new funding. I mean, I was also impressed that over the time of the Retooling initiative, agencies of all types and levels redeployed resources, redeployed staff to work with these dislocated workers and with employers to bring them on. The field did ask that there not be any arduous rulemaking of any kind, which I think everybody was in agreement with, because there was also a commitment that we needed to support innovation. And we wanted people to innovate, test. They could fail, but get up and try again. What do we learn from the failure? Where do we find those best practices or promising practices and share them? We had dialogue across the regions to learn about what they were doing and learn from each other. The implementation began in January of 2010 and continued for, I think it was about 27 months. But it was an impressive time to see so many organizations coming together to achieve a common goal. So I mentioned that we use that input gathering process in the state conference to work with the constituents to figure out how to narrow down our initiative, because it could have been even more huge and more complicated than it turned out to be. But these were the three big ideas that the folks said you need to work on. One is getting those disenfranchised unemployment insurance exhaustees back into the system somehow. So the outreach was important, but as important as figuring out what kinds of services to provide to those folks once they came back. Streamlining OJT was getting to the issue of employers saying these were risky hires. One employer made the statement, I'm willing to give a test to anybody, test them out on the job, but you have to make it easy for me to bring them on into the workplace, and also help figure out how to support them once they're there. The second part of that second bullet, making use of Microsoft's gift. Microsoft generously provided open access to their online training portfolio. They also provided some cash to some of the WDCs. I think it was 4 of the WDCs, to bring teachers or coaches on, because the folks that we were trying to get up to speed on using computers, asking them to do their training on a computer was kind of scary for folks. So it was having the two-pronged approach, I think, that really helped. The last one will sound very familiar because we could have taken it out of TAP. Coordinated outreach to employers, so single points of contact wherever possible, and then a better job matching system. Are we meeting the skills that the employer is actually asking for? Or do we understand what right fit means for those employers? And then doing follow-up surveys and customer satisfaction analysis. So the structure of the initiative, it looks a lot like TAP structure. The board had a state steering committee, and they invited a lot of other folks on to the committee, so it was beyond just the board members. And then they asked the WDCs to convene local steering committees that brought on as many partners as possible, and to develop plans that reflect both the needs of the area and the resources that were available to deploy towards the initiative. I don't want to spend too much time on this, and you do have this PowerPoint in your packet, but I did want you to see that there was so much that took place. Look at that, common intake and data sharing for case management. Doesn't that sound familiar? The common professional development, that was a really impressive body of work to teach everybody motivational interviewing techniques. And when you're working with a particularly disenfranchised group of people, this is a very important tool in the tool chest. This bullet on finding promising practices from other states, all of the partners were communicating with their counterparts in other states, trying to find any tidbit that might be useful. Here's just some more. You see the community and technical colleges were doing a lot more with online options. They were totally oversubscribed with dislocated workers looking for training and retraining. ESD enhanced, really increased the usage of that work-share program. Yeah, and it just went on from there. I think really important coincides with the values of the board today is this idea of managing and putting out our metrics in a public-facing dashboard. You know, having the public hold us accountable for our goals, and this was a really important part of the effort, and trying to find those metrics that were really meaningful to what we were trying to do. It's a combination of process and outcome metrics, updated at every board meeting, and they were updated even more regularly on our website. Engaged. So after retooling, after the initiative, the board had made a commitment throughout the initiative to learning as folks implemented different strategies, tested them out, what's working, what isn't, can we share it with others, but also learning for what can we do together as a system going forward. At the time, we weren't sure if the recession itself was going to keep on, but even where there were sprouts of recovery, so what could we have learned that we can take and continue doing or tweak? The partners commissioned external evaluators and a writer to document some of what was going on in each of the regions, some pretty amazing stories of what these partnerships at the local level were able to accomplish. Here's the thing, though, as things progressed and the economy started to turn for the better, and also it was at the time that we had all kinds of transitions in leadership and staff. It was very difficult to maintain momentum. So there were some bits of programs or changes, process changes that had been tried that disappeared. Some, stayed in some form, but a lot of it disappeared or came to a halt, or, folks just felt like I have too many other things now and this is taking care of itself. We know it's not true because the recovery was really slow and long, and there's still areas of the state that haven't recovered. And this was a great opportunity for learning. We did use some of it when WIOA and the TAP planning process came along. And those ideas came up again in the TAP planning process. Things like integrated service delivery and single points of contact for employers, coordinated professional development for frontline staff. All of these things that were tried during the initiative came up again because people felt very positively about what they had experienced. I should point out, the other big idea that came out of that initiative was the upskill backfill concept. As employers said, help us first to upskill the people that we have, and then be there to help us backfill the new positions that are created as a result of those upskilling changes. So that too got inserted into TAP. We're moving into the TAP planning process for 2020, and the plan as it is really resonates. We learned that as we did those surveys prior to the retreat. The majority of our partners, the staff in the field, they still believe that we were right on target. But we have a lot of frustration because while there was a lot of engagement in the beginning and plans and charters and all kinds of things were put out to the field, but we hit this state of inertia where a whole lot of decisions needed to be made and they hadn't been made, and it didn't look like they were going to be made. And you heard about a number of them during the retreat. There's still a belief in the will of leadership to get to the goals and vision of TAP, but a clear feeling of inertia. Similar feelings and frustrations about how retooling Washington's workforce ended. Again, it went out with a whimper. So I say all of that not to depress you, but to get you thinking about if the paramount duty of the Workforce Board is the continuous improvement of our state's workforce development system and public investments in workforce development and education, do we need to be able to create a more flexible system that can respond to economic and demographic shifts when they occur? Is there something else about that imperative that we need to be thinking about that we haven't? In any event, whatever it is that we create, we should always be aiming to help more job seekers get better jobs and the ability to keep them and grow in their careers, and also to help employers, and as many employers as possible, find and maintain their talented workers. So might economic cycle planning help our system through these kinds of hurdles and transition points? Is there another idea that folks have to get us moving again? Because we're going out to the field to start talking about TAP and what folks want to do with TAP, and we want to show the board's commitment to that vision of the flexible, responsive system. Thank you.